Hi, hello everyone. I would like to introduce myself, but I want to keep it short so that we can get started. My name is Dr. Resnet Mogus Rydell. I am part of the ASLD program here at the CSULB in the Linguistics Department. CSULB is for the California State University at Long Beach. ASLD program has hosted the Scholarly Intersections Symposium. The College of Liberal Arts has funded and supported this endeavor in collaboration with other departments across the university. Today we have Dr. Crystal Yin Lee with us. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Crystal Lee. I'm an assistant professor in the Comparative World Literature department, where I teach the literature and medicine courses, health humanities, disability studies, as well as a class on comics and graphic narratives. So I'm really excited about this event.
This is set up as a webinar, and I'd like to just go over a couple of the settings we have in the program. So we have panelists and the chat feature so that you can ask a question to any of the panelists. At the bottom of the Zoom, you will see a Q&A button that you can push at any time and submit your question. We have a Q&A portion for this program towards the end. So we will be keeping track of the questions via this feature located at the bottom of the Zoom settings. Our first panelist will be Awit Mogus. And so I will now turn it over to Crystal Lee.
I'm going to give Awit Mogus' bio here. Awit Mogus is a mytho poet whose dreams are full of ancient mythologies, but revised with subversive science fiction tropes. As a writer artist with over 15 years of experience, he has worked on all sorts of jobs in a variety of industries and worked with various organizations and has won several awards of recognition. He is currently teaching ASL at CSULB.
Thank you for that, Dr. Lee. Hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Lee. I hope you guys are surviving the LA weather. It's actually the perfect weather for us to be indoors and behind closed doors, and so that, you know, we can fully participate remotely. My presentation has two parts. I talk about generations and move towards futurism, pan-futurism. Okay. Generations, generational awareness, 4 types of generations, my parents, my generation, and sublimation as my solution. This provides you with an overview of my presentation. I have used different sources of materials and will give you context to how I began my journey thus far. So how can we talk about art? Art was developed with generational knowledge. We are first born as individuals. We are already born with a generation that heavily influences us. So if you will, we are a type of cohort. That means that each generation cycle is a psychological shift that takes place between generations that lasts about approximately 20 years. And they are often, again, repeat and depend on different generations and how they respond to each other. So if you can just imagine a lifetime, in one lifetime, you can have family members that are infants and elderly at the same time. So we're responding to our environments. And through this response and varying pressures of culture based on these generations, this is what creates the zeitgeist. Every generation desires to separate itself from the previous one and bring something new to the world, something of value. However, as we grow older, the generational values we inherit close us off from other points of views and narrow the breadth of our minds. So to understand this powerful influence, we have to understand who we are and the influences. To become artists, we have to use the understanding and the spirit of our generation and the times we live in so that we are better able to live and lead and exploit the zeitgeist. We can even become the ones to set the very trends our generation is looking for by freeing our minds from the limitations of generations and becoming independent. But how does each generation separate itself from the preceding ones? According to the 14th century Islamic scholar Ibn Khaldun, human history moves in 4 acts: revolutionaries, stabilizers, pragmatists, and skeptics. This first generation, the revolutionaries, they make a radical break from the past. They establish values, but in doing so, they create chaos. This revolutionary process has always strong leaders. This is an image of Eritrean freedom fighters, an actual image from the era. This is the era that my parents belonged in. My parents came from the revolution generation in Ethiopia because they were Eritreans who joined the Eritrean People's Liberation Front and teamed up with the Ethiopian Liberation Front rebellion against the Solomonic dynasty. So my family moved to America and my parents had to adapt to the dynamics that were from a different generation here in the US, the pragmatists. They wanted to solve problems and make life as comfortable as possible and began to build things. My father helped build a church in Los Angeles. This is a picture of the Orthodox Church. My mother traded in politics for religion. And with new allies, life became stable and practical. Well, where does that leave me? I'm part of the next generation, the generation of skeptics. I'm a first generation immigrant. I did absorb the values of my peers. And as a member of the subsequent generation, I felt the previous generation had lost the vitality, but I wasn't sure what should replace it. I questioned the values that I had inherited from my parents and became cynical, but I am no longer, I no longer knew what I believed. And so a crisis emerged. Many of us turn to demagogues or scapegoats or tribalize or try to recover an earlier time, i.e. the good old days. With generational awareness, I had enough distance to identify how generations shape everyone. And I studied that collective spirit. So in that study, I found solution. So those solutions, thankfully, was art and making art. My general disappointment with institutions like our government and religion became the very solution itself, creating stories about rebellion against the system. I developed an art style and created stories that expressed this cynical disbelief with the past and an ironic attitude towards established values. My first graphic novel, Pantheon, is about a bunch of gods rebelling against godhood. This sublimated my experience of malaise. And through this sublimation, I developed coping skills. I was meant to write and draw these stories, expressing the collective feelings of the skeptics. That's how I coped. All right, I hope you're all with me still. So shifting gears into pan-futurism. And this is the sign for it, the two gloss signs of all future. Pan-futurism is a genre with the science, part of the science fiction genres. And it really works towards asking a question about what the future holds for humanity. Science fiction has long grappled with this question, but traditional sci-fi genres like cyberpunk and space opera may no longer be up to the task. So again, we're grappling with this question. We have the past with traditional sci-fi genres, cyberpunk, for example, and the space age that started the exploration of what it means to be in the future. Afrofuturism, it's part of the sci-fi genre without the colonial mentality and othering. It is reimagined with African identity and an unapologetic Black identity. Panfuturism is a new subgenre in its own right. Panfuturism. What it does is reimagine our ancient mythologies in a post-human future. Unlike cyberpunk's focus on digital and virtual worlds, Panfuturism explores a world where our gods still roam. They're here. So as we face a dystopian reality shaped by technology and oppressive power structures, Panfuturisms offer a fresh perspective on what lies ahead. Do we need a panfuturism? Well, it addresses issues that other sci-fi genres have failed. The future of our species, I mean, when you think about it, what happens to the earth if we fail as caretakers? And what happens to our stories? What happens to myth in a post-human reality? Panfuturism incorporates ancient mythologies, but without the presumption of the epic nature of the gods, their privilege. It functions as a deconstruction of mythology as a form of storytelling, but in a modern sense, with a greater emphasis on the existential orientation of the protagonist. So despite the enormous scope and the brisk plot, the events of Pantheon are actually the backdrop for the true story of Kaeli's personal odyssey. Kaeli is the image of the figure with the red hair afro. So Kaeli's personal odyssey is about regaining her true self through her lost memories. The resolution of the story doesn't come from the end of the immortal and mortal relationship, but from the protagonist coming to grips with her sudden non-enlightenment. My graphic novel, Pantheon, isn't the first example of panfuturism. Lord of Light is an example of panfuturism because it reimagines Hindu and Buddhist mythologies as science fiction. So with this first book, I was really inspired because this reimagining really took on Hindu and Buddhist mythologies. The protagonist rebels against the tyranny of the gods. This reflects the panfuturistic trope of a cynical distance from the gods themselves and the truth of their identities. Similarly, American Gods is an example of panfuturism because it takes old gods from the old world and places them in modern America, where they must compete with the new gods of modernity. This builds on old myths with new events, which is another staple of panfuturism. So how is panfuturism art for everyone? For everyone, what I mean by that is that it's an all-inclusive approach, as every one of us is an entire species. It must address the true purpose of our existence, our being, and our future. But at the same time, panfuturism cannot be for any one of us in particular. All-inclusive means all. Pantheon is about the fate and destiny of our species, including our gods who may outlast humanity. If it is for no one, then we are not ready to understand our fate as a species. Pantheon is for everyone and no one. And this is where you can find my book. It is available on Amazon. And for those that are tuning in, and this is the CEU code. And if you miss that slide, we'll bring it right back up. All right, Carlisle, take it away. Awit, thank you so much for your presentation. You see that, and for those that don't know, you see our names on the video box. Awit is my brother. He has shaped my imagination. So thank you for supporting this event by joining us today. So next up we have Carlisle Robinson. They are a Canadian American comic creator and illustrator. They are passionate about educating the public with rarely told stories by minority groups themselves and specifically deaf people. Carlisle went to Gallaudet University for undergrad, graduated from the Center of Cartoon Studies in spring 2015 with a Master in Fine Arts. They currently reside in Toronto. I look forward to your presentation, Carlisle. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. It was so amazing watching Awit's presentation. I really enjoyed it. Now I'm gonna go through my presentation, which I talk about my upbringing, who I am as a deaf queer artist. Perfect, thank you. Next slide. So who am I? You already got my name. This is my name sign because my glasses always fall off. So that's how I got my name sign. But my name is Carlisle. When I was small, I used to love comics. I grew up involved with them. I was born into a hearing family, and they found out I was deaf before I was 1, and they began to learn sign because they wanted to be able to say, I love you, and for me to understand them. So you see, this is me doing a comic as a child. And even at a young age, I drew and my mom drew. And so that tradition of art is passed down in our family and has been an important part of my life. I think I was 8 years old or something. I was in love with Pokemon when I drew this. You know, now they've got the video, the cell phone game about it. But really making these comics was type of journal activity for me. And the words and the pictures helped with my creativity. When I was young, I really loved Garfield and Calvin and Hobbes and Sitz. They're just everything for me. Next one. When I went to high school, the world changed. I was in high school in 2003. So that was after 9/11, where, you know, the world was different. And I was looking at what world politics were like and how history impacted that. You know, kids start doing that at that age. They start understanding their world. They go from a time of innocence to awareness. So one of my favorite comics at that time was Doonesbury. You know, this created character from the 60s or 70s. And I mean, it's one of those comics that's still going today. I believe it's about 50 years old. I still like to read them, even going through the old ones, the characters and the politics and their arguments about history. They're really informative. I really love political comics. The pictures are so impactful, like the strip that's there. It shows wealthy people and coming up to others stating, you need to move out of the way. And back in the day, you know, we forget how things used to be. Now, Matt Daigle produced a comic based on his experience of being deaf. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but there's so many comics that are just wonderful. So I'm very thankful because you don't find many deaf artists out there. And Matt collaborates with his wife, Kay, in creating this comic strip. And they're just beautifully done. You know, in this one, they're talking about, you know, going to the bathroom and everything. And it's kind of, you know, that open conversation is part of the deaf experience. And then our Andreen Clark also did a comic, which included sign in it, and the SI5S writing system, which is a writing system that was developed for ASL. Then Sean Richardson, another famous comic artist, is giving an example of the deaf experience and saying that I'm not deaf. I can't hear, I'm not ignoring you, but I'm deaf. And then Tammy Davidson, she's stating in the comic, I'm not an interpreter, I'm his mother. I'm the interpreter, I'm not his mother. Correction. So I'm sure that, you know, some interpreters have had that experience with their consumers. It's like, no, I'm not their parent. I'm just here to interpret for them. High school, I really got involved in doing my own comic, really understanding my journey, understanding my growth, you know, the war that was going on, you know, creating all of that. You know, the Westport mass shooting, everything that was going on. I'm talking about weapons of mass destruction and seeing how, you know, the politics and the ableism and oppression out there impacted my daily life as a teenager. So I used to express a lot of those ideas through comics. And then in college, I started at the Blue and the Buff, the Gallaudet magazine, the Buff and the Blue, pardon, correction. At the Gallaudet magazine, I published a comic that was looking at, you know, ableism and equality and how that was being addressed. And that experience really changed the world and really impacted, you know, my growth. After college, a friend said, hey, you're really funny. You really should continue with this. And so I did. And I got more and more recognition. And it has had such an impact on people that's really moved me. And my passion is really art. And, you know, some people have said, oh, you can't get a good job as an artist. You know, maybe if you really love it, you know, that'll be fine. You can do it for fun, but you can't do this as a job. And as a deaf person, you can't do this. And so that unfortunately caused me to feel some doubt, but with the support of some people, I was able to do this and succeed. Because of that, I'm not a starving artist. So now the Center for Cartoon Studies. You see a scene in Vermont. It's a specific comic that's been going on for 2 years that I've been working on. And I worked on character development and, worked on panel by panel by panel until after almost a year as a senior thesis, as, I was talking about, really putting your heart and soul into a piece of work, investing all that you have, this was created. And so there are several projects that I work on, that I worked on through grad school, working with deaf and disabled characters, heroes, looking at my experience. It's just been a wonderful way to experiment with different styles and genres to really meet that need. And I went there, the Center for Cartoon, because of, not necessarily to draw per se, because I already did that, but I felt that I really wanted to push myself. What was I going to do? How was I going to do it? And the school really pushed me to be better. The teachers, the students, every week we had, professionals come in, comic artists come and show their work and work with us, present. So it was really an awesome experience. The Case of Victor Gray, that was my first year final project. And it was sorry, I was signing something from Canadian. It was about a deaf character in the early 1900s and looking at the impact of the Milan Conference and the spread of oralism at that AGB time and that impact. And having the deaf character and the deaf teachers, and you can see here the actual copy of it. Next. And so I still didn't have a job at that point, so I was still waiting to see what to do. And then grad school finished. And I stopped working for a bit. I didn't have funding, but this story is about an alien, as you can see, who adopted a human baby, and the alien communicated through telepathy. And so in this case, the human could be telepathic, maybe some of us could be, I don't know, but anyways, so that challenges of that and them, deciding to speak and learn how to communicate and that whole journey. And it's kind of parallel almost to that deaf being born into a hearing family journey where, in this case, the alien, becomes disabled and interacting in a world of able-bodied, and, where they're from, they can't do that. So it's something interesting to think about. After grad school finished, I did a short autobiographical comic, What QQ, looking at the TTY that I grew up with. And then this is just an example of slurping soda. I don't know if you can see the slide moving, the little hands moving as people chatting. And then here is like, wow, a group of signing deafies. And then, wait a minute. Oh, they're just gesturing. They're not signing. And then, fooled again by those hearing people who gesture. Fooled again. So then moving on in my art journey, I found out when I was about 22 that I am non-binary, and trans. And so I started doing art that addressed that and being queer. It was very empowering. You know, being trans is beautiful. And so I put that comic on hold for a bit while I was going through my journey, coming out, really finding myself. But I realized, you know, that I was still in that process learning about myself. And once I get a further place in my identity and my growth, I'll go back to it. The current project that I'm working on is the story of ... It's about the Ontario College, Garrett's. And so it's looking at the province and what's being demonstrated there in that project. I also have gone to comic conventions and done a lot of displays, met with lots of people. So that is me in a nutshell. Thank you, thank you. And thanks to Awet too.
Thank you, Carlisle. You've been such an inspiration, especially for our contemporary youth. So moving on in the program, we are now into the Q&A portion. Crystal, I just want to mention the Scholarly Intersection Symposium. We are working with the Southern California Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, and many of their members are here with us today. So we are posting the code that was shared earlier. So if you are here at the webinar and looking to earn your CEUs, this is the number that we flashed earlier. Let's see. Here it is. Thank you, tech person. Okay, so make sure you write down the CEU code. It is capital X 438, capital H, capital M 25. All right, so as I was saying, we're having our roundtable discussion next, and then our Q&A. So I know that there are some, there was a question about the chat feature and being able to interact via the chat. We hadn't set it up for this webinar. However, we will take that into consideration for our next event. So make sure that you fill out your evaluation and use that very same code to then mark your attendance and earn your CEUs. I will then now continue with our panel discussion. So this is just anyone can start, and if you feel compelled to answer a question first or second, either way works. You can work it out together. And I really have to take a moment for this historic moment because we have two graphic novelists, graphic artists, mythopoet creators. And so with the Canadian sign comic strip, I think I like it more than what we're using here in ASL. And to give respect to you, Carlisle, I'll use it now. So what are some of the experiences that you've experienced in the past that has influenced you currently as a creator, especially when you consider your marginalized identities and intersectional identities? I will leave the question open for just a little while longer and then close all the windows so that you can answer the question as a panel.
Yeah, go ahead. Do you want me to go first? What do you want to do? No, I'm fine. Either way. There you go.
Okay, if we had a ball, I would toss it to you, so we wouldn't have to figure out who to go first. So in terms of representation and representing or being a representative of my community, I mean, I mean, there are preconceived notions, right? So you feel obligated, and I feel like there's an obligation to use my art to start a new revolution. So I've considered these ideas. And so it brings me to more question. Should I be an activist? Should I an active participant in a sense? So I say I should, because it's empowering, it's important. I'm trying to balance the philosophical message that I believe is authentic to my vision. And this sometimes doesn't necessarily align with my identity. I'm not necessarily looking to have clout, not trying to chase clout, not trying to create clickbait content. I don't want to lose credibility in my content if I chase trends, for example. So, I mean, it's a thin line, but my goal is to stay sincere, authentic, instead of jumping on different bandwagons. Art itself has this power to transform, to shape public opinion. And so, yes, it can be used as a tool to promote change for the future. When we look at the pandemic and the different changes, social changes that were happening, we can look to the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And how we could participate depending on our own abilities, right? So I actually created art that reflected the turmoil and the protest of Black Lives Matters. So again, you can reflect contemporary issues in your art. Pro bono ASL provided free ASL services during the Black Lives Matter movement marches here in Los Angeles. And because of that, I started attending the protest marches because I knew they'd be accessible.
Yeah, there is that fine line of being pressured to represent and tell one story to represent everybody, and that's just not possible. You know, everyone, might disagree with my work. Everybody has different lives, so it's really challenging when I have to bear that burden. And I agree with you. I went to a deaf school and then transferred into a mainstream school, and I was there alone by myself as a deaf person. And so maybe I was the first person or the only deaf person that these kids knew growing up. And as the comic, when I draw, I have control of the narrative. I can set my platform for whatever I want it to be. It's interesting, you talked about Gen X and millennials and
I
social
did.
media and everything else, these expectations. Oh, you have to draw to make people like you. Well, we hope people like our work, and that would be nice, but I don't want to be pressured by that expectation, that social media puts on us. It is very pressuring. And, comics and things go viral. And what we're hoping is that they understand our community, our message, our idea, and that often you know, with deaf people and getting access, you know, and having to get interpreters and there being a shortage and all of that, you know, online, you know, it can be very pressuring.
Carla, I'm sure you share similar feelings in terms of having a marginalized identity and the oppressions that we deal with, you know, and the impacts, right? So, I mean, pretty much I think we're in survival mode. We're kind of figuring out how we can live for our art instead of live by our art. And so you need, you know, you need money to survive. And if you had an infinity in terms of money, access to money, then you will be free to create without worrying or being tied down to your need for money.
It is challenging finding that balance. In Canada, you know, when I was there before I moved here, I think I filled out about 40 applications to art-related jobs. And they, you know, it was only one that I got a hit on. And then they said, oh, well, you know, you're deaf. And I was like, yeah.
Oh,
because
you mentioned that you're deaf on your website?
Well, I did. I took it. I wasn't going to take it off because I didn't want to just, you know, hide my identity. It was important for me but I had to work. So often people in the deaf community are figured out, you know, oh, we have to make our work a certain way, like mainstream society, when there's so much more out there. So do we go on to question 2? How important is diversity behind productions in the comic and graphic novel industry? So I'm sorry, what did you say?
Elaborate on this question. I can elaborate on this question a little bit.
Okay, hold on one second. We just had to spotlight the interpreter for you. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I can elaborate on this question for both of you, Carlisle and Awet. I just want to say thank you again for just the really wonderful and inspiring presentations on your work. So the question that we're hoping you could talk about here with diversity, you know, both of you have already talked a bit about how diversity matters in your work in terms of deaf identity, race or gender identity, age, and even generation, which I thought was really beautiful. So, you know, we were wondering, do you have more to say about this in terms of your own work or where you want your work to go, or perhaps just the comic and graphic novel industry in general, and what more needs to be done there?
Well, I guess I can start. There are several people that have started to take interest into our culture, I guess. So I would say in the mid 2000s, there's been a shift because instead of coming up with new stuff, there's been a kind of a remake of all the sequels for old movies. So in terms of music, there's remixes. And so this shift has been one where you're just reproducing old material. So with the digitizing and creating content, we're limited by what's already been made. So I think in terms of what we can do is give opportunities to those that have marginalized identities. because we're at I guess kind of a type of bottleneck in our culture in terms of creating and producing material. And so there are people creating content. I mean, we are creators. And so when we're looking at the scope, the whole with different genres, it's been homogenized from the beginning. I mean, we have cis, white males. The tendency is to have majority males in the industry. And again, we need to focus on creators that are different from previous generations. Are we able to break that cycle? Well, we definitely need support from other creators that have made it, and to just bring more opportunity and just bring them into the fold in this industry.
Yeah, look at the Marvel movies, the DC movies. Oh my gosh, if there's so much out there like that. It is true. You know, where are we going to grow from? Where is that diversity? Because it's interesting, on the indie comic scene, there's so much diversity. Oh, so much better than before. But really, you know, they're not allowed to grow beyond the limits that, you know, society has constrained them. It's like, you know, those older, stronger trees are taller and block the sun. They have deeper roots, and the shoots and saplings below them can't grow. So we need those saplings to grow to produce fresh ideas. And interesting, I was reading Marvel Comics, and they have the deaf character Echo, which is really cool, but it just wasn't written well and had the right representation. I went to the Boston Comic Con and saw the comic there, the writer, and met the person and was saying, yeah, this isn't really right. You know, at that time when it was written in the 90s, they were talking about them, they couldn't use the phone. Well, there was a TTY, and the person's like, oh, well, yeah, duh, you know, they couldn't really answer to it.
So that's your writer.
We need to break that that cycle. I mean, it can't continue to be like that where we're stuck. Yeah. You want to move on to the next one?
Yes. Okay.
Okay, I'll go ahead. If you want to, I can go ahead. And oh, there it is. Okay, there's the question. That's the last question, actually. We just finished. Can you move on to the next one? Okay, there it is. Whoops, my video won't turn off.
Okay, so you both mentioned how you've incorporated parts of your marginalized identities within your work and how you've negotiated that. The identities, such as the example you brought up of whether you should include in your bio that you're deaf, and what does it mean to erase that identity, to remove that identity, and also to remove the gaze of disability. So Carla, you also mentioned something that kind of gave me pause. So which made me think, if I wasn't deaf, would I be an artist? So again, how important is representation? So you can elaborate on the question of how important is the representation of a deaf or disabled character or narrative in your work, if you have any. And if none, how do you provide representation for your marginalized identities in your artwork? And you can consider maybe and explore your artwork as you produced it maybe in the past, and currently, and in the future.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think if I were not deaf that I would be an artist. I would draw, but really art helps me define who I am and connect to people and finding a way to interact. So, even, as doing art as a kid in class.
Yeah, I'd connect it the same way.
Yeah. As I mentioned before, I see not a lot of deaf role models in comics. And there really needs to be trailblazers. They're out there. They need to just get out there to be shown, to show what we can do and see the impact their comics can have on people like they did on me. I want to be able to do that too. I have such varied motivation, political and oppression, education, deafness, the list goes on and on. And to be able to talk about that in one comic is possible. And so, I want to be able for future generations to be able to see that. I don't want it to be limited anymore.
I agree.
So the new generation has a lot to offer and they should be allowed to give it.
Yep. And I don't want to receive the question, well, why didn't you? Why didn't you make a way? I don't have any deaf characters in my stories. However, I am a deaf immigrant, and my experience in the US has actually hasn't had a type of anchor that other people do. I was mainstreamed. I was the first deaf person in my family, and that impact kind of shaped my experience. So yes, I turned to graphic novels, comic narratives to tell stories and to use my experience of alienation in my stories. So on the surface, it's not a story about a deaf character or deaf characters or a deaf world. However, that alienating feeling has to do, it is a thread that runs throughout my story. So feeling a connection to my stories comes in many ways because I address all of them in my stories. So in terms of diversity, I think it's natural for me to be all inclusive. I don't necessarily want to choose one to stand for the whole. I'm a deaf immigrant that came to this country of the land of the free, where you can pursue your dreams. And the characters in my books, however, are characters of that I know in my daily life. They're an extension, a long extension of the people that I know in my life. So again, that connection is there for me and to me.
Yeah, there's so much pressure and responsibility on deaf people who do or make things that we don't have to make things that are deaf related. We don't have to do comics, it's not like, making cookies or cakes or whatnot, where we have to do it a certain way. But of course, we can always include the subtext of our deaf experience in our stories. When I draw comics, sometimes I have several deaf characters, but their deafness may have no impact on the story. I also include disabled characters. And sometimes I feel that we're really lucky to be alive in this community, have this heritage passed down to us. Because now people who are deaf and disabled are becoming more resistant. They're not being in isolation. They're coming together. They're finding solidarity and unity. And it's been a long time, for us to be able to be out there together.
Yes.
And to have so much information and everything. It's been so beneficial for both deaf and disabled individuals to get that acceptance of their identities.
Yeah, accepting of our disabled identities. I get that. So I have people that meet with that come up to me, and well, let's imagine that I say, well, we're on a planet. If they're wondering how we're going to communicate, right? So we're on a planet, we're worshiping God, and they don't use their mouth to speak. They only use, they're visually oriented, right? So visually oriented, and they start signing. And so again, you would meet and start signing right away. And so I'm working on a story where that actually happens, and everyone's visually oriented.
It's wonderful to play around that way, where the character themselves goes into that world and has to learn how to be deaf. And it's important for us to talk about that intersectionality in our stories. Because when I come up and talk about different issues and things that I see, I incorporate those into my comics. Sometimes people say, oh, wow, you're just doing too much. You're addressing and talking about stuff like that. And I mean, but that's what I want to do. That's what, we talk about in school, amongst friends, at work. This is what our community does. It's what we see every day. It's the very nature of our experience and our world living as oppressed amongst people who are privileged. It's our reality.
It sure is. I do expect some kind of, complaints. I mean, when you put yourself out there and you put your work out there, you make yourself available, to any kind of critique, any comments, just whether it's positive or negative. And if the person is deaf, I mean, they're going to get an eyeful,
It is a
because we
challenge.
can.
Yeah, it's a challenge having comic as a platform and having, friends in the deaf community come out and they're like, oh yeah, we're happy, but did you, we need more of you. There can't just be so few of us out there. I mean, I guess, it's like one platform for like, it would be a deaf club.
Yep, I know that experience.
But it's also a way for us to say, yes, we're deaf and we're artists and we're here and we have comics and creativity. And it is a big deal. We're living and experiencing these challenges. And for like the first day at this event, I didn't have an interpreter budget wise. The second day I did. And I was at a table and I had all my materials and comics and everything like that set up. I had a book to write notes. I don't lip read. I was ready to communicate. I was ready to go. And people would like walk up, look at me and look down and then walk away. And they'd like give me a thumbs up and then keep walking. And, nobody really wanted to interact that way. Now, the second day with the interpreter, my table blew up. I was like, oh, really? I mean, I could have had a wonderful experience that first day. I would have been, worth it, if they'd had it.
Yeah, well, we pay a high interest rate in this field, in this industry. I mean, we have to have a type of sound currency, pun intended, to gain attention. And sometimes, yes, we do get attention from deaf folks. And at the same time, we need attention from non-deaf folks so that our material could be sold and can reach wider audiences. So I try my best with using the speech that I do have. But again, if people haven't met a deaf person, they'll be put off. And so again.
Yeah. And with masks, such a challenge.
I don't even try it. It's not even worth it.
All right. I think that's all for my answer.
Okay.
Hold on,
So
Crystal. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so this next question is related to the conversation that's been happening, and that is, can you two share some of your strategies for navigating, institutional autism? And the question here says overcome, but perhaps overcome isn't, the precise word I want to use. Perhaps how do you subvert or challenge institutional autism, or any other forms of discrimination that you may have come across in the comic and graphic novel industry?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, good. So in terms of navigation strategies, I make it up as I go along. There is no playbook. My philosophy has to do, in terms of obstacles, has to do with just looking at it as a problem that needs to be solved. So I did look to building a network initially, like-minded people who had same goals, same values in the world of comics. And so once I did, I created this network. This was before social media. I was using discussion boards. And I befriended many of those people that I met in these discussion boards. These communication barriers, if you will, were temporarily suspended. I knew that I wouldn't have a mentor. So I had a deaf mentor at that. I had to create a mentor. And the idea of a mentor, I had to create it in an inverse approach. So I would look for anyone that was really talented, and in terms of with the artwork that I was interested in, and I would look at earlier works from these individuals. And so by starting there, I would then progress to their later works, and I was, in a sense, being inversely mentored through their published works. So I joined Instagram in the year 2010, and I started posting my artwork every day, any sketch. Even if it wasn't ready to go, I would just post my sketches on Instagram on a daily basis. I was very productive. So I started building an audience in that way. So little by little, the growth wasn't exponential and overnight. I made content for people that were interested in consuming my content. So resilience, I would say, persistence, perseverance are good values to have. I would have to say staying true to my vision. My vision was my North Star. And if I deviated from the path, that's fine. Because they were all journeys that would get me to my end destination. So again, resilience, perseverance. I also had a commitment to being all inclusive, so that I would empower myself and mutually empower others to create content and to create meaningful change. I don't know where we're going from now, but that's where I'm at now.
Yep, that was beautiful. It's not easy to address this. I remember when I was young and how I was hesitant going into this because I wasn't aware of what it was like back in the 90s. It was white, cis male, able-bodied individuals dominating it, and they were acting as gatekeepers. And if you didn't fit their mold exactly the way they wanted you to, they wouldn't let you in. Being a gate, you had to know these certain facts to get in. And so it was just so devastating. It's like, how could someone get in? And the comics, you know, there are so many out there. It shouldn't be limited. People should be able to produce anything. Really, it's just about continuing to work. I mean, it can be lonely. If you don't have that network that you talked about, it's true. You might just have a few supporters out there. But every year, you know, I see, you know, someone folds, you know, the business ebbs and flows. People start and then they stop. And we really need to work together to face the challenge. And so I did go through a period of burnout because of all the oppression and all the struggle that I had to go through. It's a lot of work. And that's why it's important for hearing people to advocate for us, to help lift us up, to say, see, they're out here, look at this amazing work, you know, share our stories. You know, others too, if you go to, you know, some comic event and you don't see deaf and disabled individuals represented, go to the organizers and say, hey, where's the diversity? Speak up, let them know they've dropped the ball. That would be really, really helpful.
I agree.
And just persistence, keep at it. It's really important to draw what makes you happy. If you're forced to draw something you don't want to, it's just terrible. It's such a chore, and it increases your burnout, and you lose your motivation, and you'll end up probably just quitting. So you have to draw what motivates you and what you love, and find a way to do that. So I'm here talking about it, sharing that all with you guys. Yeah, that's about it.
You both have different brands. You have different art styles. What are your thoughts on art creators, either that are part of or not part of a deaf disabled group? Copyrighting either a cultural symbol affiliated with their cultural deaf communities. I'd like to give you an example. There was a mishap that happened with the ILY or I love you sign. There was an attempt to copyright that sign. However, is it a type of appropriation? You know, having the ability to copyright cultural content from another minority group to gain profit is quite an issue for us in the industry, and just for us as deaf people and disabled people.
Yeah, oh my goodness. Because many of us deaf artists in the community are fearful. You know, what's going on? What does this mean? How does it impact us? When you get that type of like pendant where it's an I love you symbol or something like that, some design or drawing related to that. I don't think, that any one person should have that control of that symbol. And I understand some people want to protect their own creative endeavors. I get that. But, there's a range on what I think you can protect. So, for example, if I draw something related to like the transgender symbol and, I sell that, and that's fine, but I don't think I would copyright it. Like the sign transgender is, I don't own a sign, so no one owns sign language. So I couldn't copyright that. I could sell material based on it. But I feel that, as a group, deaf people should get together and talk about this and see if we can get it, certain things protected. And so not, having copyrights given out to specific groups, because it's our culture and it's the deaf community and our language and we own it. And so we need to get together on that to address it. Also, I've had experience before where someone stole my artwork and was selling it as their own. And that just shook my world. It's like they tweaked it just a little bit so that trying to get away with that. And they're like, oh no, I'm doing this. And I was like, really? You're really doing this to encourage sign? You're taking away from deaf creators is what you're doing. And, places like Facebook and other groups saying, oh, we advocate for you. And they use that symbol. And if you use it in comics and artwork without saying a name, without getting permission, it happens all the time. These people steal the symbol and the community has to work together to identify them, who they are. It's like, oh, do you have permission? Or are you, deaf? Can you really use that? You have to get that approval. And if you don't, you need to get credit where you got it from so it can go back to whomever it belonged to. So, yeah. So what, as an artist, if we do this sign, the LGBTQ symbol, and I put that, it's like I have to protect my work, but I can't take something that's not mine.
I have a watermark for my artwork. So if I do post on Facebook, for example, there's my name shows up with it's opaque, right? So you can't really remove it unless they're really, some kind of, to have that technical expertise to do so. In terms of that copywritten I love you sign, it's so ubiquitous. I mean, it's everywhere, really. I mean, you can find that I love you sign anywhere. In terms of protecting your own creative work, you can copyright that, but not appropriate the language of the deaf community and then use it for profit. I mean, it's in a type of appropriation, and it's not even benefiting the community. So yes, we do need to go to the patent office, like you said. They need to realize what are cultural artifacts and how they are separate from creating content, creative content, right? So they can't make that decision. They're not in the position. They are not even in the position to make those type of decisions. So yes, we do need to head down to the patent office, but it will take a group of us. So if I ever make a patent or copyright, for a character's name, it's kind of strange because you can't really copyright mythology. It's something that's been built on thousands and centuries, years on end. So again, wow, it's quite a question, and how, what it means to use someone else's material. Now, I'm bringing attention, for example, to old material as a way to make a point or educate, someone, but to copyright that, yeah, that's a different question altogether.
Yeah, if we look at old works and, people now trying to put a spin on it, like, certain language or whatnot. But, at that time, how do people understand how we are today and what we believe now, and reanalyze the thinking from the past, thoughts, philosophy? That's important. As far as the IY symbol, that's very clear. It's very unique. People decorate them, put bling on them. They get all kinds of creative on them. And is that acceptable as a usage? What about different types of drawings or different silhouettes? For example, there's a famous sculpture, the Love, Love, that's, produced in a square with the letters standing on top of each other. Is that copyrighted? I mean, if it is, I wonder, but suppose it is that unique enough? Because it's the word love, anyone can use the word love, but is the way that it's presented, LO then VE below it, is that unique enough that it could be copyright? I mean, I don't have an answer, but that's akin to the situation with the I love you symbol.
Oh, I looked at the hashtag deaf talent in the controversy around it. Yeah, I mean, we opened up a can of worms with that situation.
Yeah, in our society, people, steal from those who have marginalized identity. They steal our original ideas and put it forth as their own. And they don't credit it. So, we need to respect, those who create those images and those ideas. And, the society is becoming more focused on money and the drive to get more money. And capitalism, is encouraging that, like Instagram right now, it's going through the roof, and, you can use it as a selling tool. People that are out there posting videos every single day. I mean, it's big business. And for me, just one person, what am I going to do? I'm going to wake up, I'm going to go on Instagram, post something. Okay, I'm done for the day. Do I really want to do that with my work? I really want to be proud of the way that I show my work and create something really beautiful, not just, cookie cutter stuff to post.
Okay, so thanks for the wonderful conversation so far. Last question that we have for the both of you before hopefully having some time for chat is, what specific changes in the comic or graphic industry do you foresee or wish to see in 2 years or even 5 years or even like a decade from now? And this could be kind of your vision of the future in terms of anything that you'd hope to see in terms of maybe diversity or accessibility, et cetera.
Thank you, Crystal, for your question. Let's see. Well, I'm thinking I have some ideas that I have yet to put in practice. So yes, we need more diversity, and not and just as a practice. We're not just checking off boxes. And what I mean is creators, having people that have these intersectional identities or marginalized identities. So representation is important. We are independent creators. We don't always have the resources or the connections to break it into the mainstream or to make it even big in this industry. So an increase in accessibility. AI can possibly give us tools in terms of comic strips being more accessible for a larger audience. We can have translation of printed text into signed writing. For those that have deaf people that have English as a second language, signed writing is a way to make ASL more accessible in written form. So again, being creative and to break down some of those barriers, especially if your first language is a sign language like ASL. We do have a niche being creators as we are. So definitely having ways to display and exhibit our work. So, I mean, we have social media and we can capture an audience, but we need wider audiences. Social media kind of bypasses gatekeepers, but the gatekeepers are still there. We also can use Mastodon, which is a platform that doesn't use gatekeepers. Social media has gatekeepers, as a matter of fact. So for me, I've gotten more engagement for every post I make on Mastodon. That's without an algorithm, right? So all it is people seeing my work. They can choose to comment, like it or not, and that's it. So this is, again, before the takeover of big business into these social media forays.
For me, give us a seat at the table.
Yes.
And not just that booth, but make us involved with the decision making and involved in the whole process, the publishing, the choices. Give us control, give us access. Not everyone has the access to get training. There's a lot of people in the deaf community who went through language deprivation and others who have privilege. And for many of us, English is not our first language. ASL is my first language. And so that's the way I think, that's the way I see my world. That's how I communicate. And sometimes I come to loggerheads trying to think of the word that, I want to put down in English. And sometimes there's grammatical mistakes. Sometimes I have to ask a friend to check that. And I'm just, it's not worth it. It's not important. I don't want to be a trope or anything, but, it's fine.
Yeah, most of it is. If you're writing in your L1, for example, your English L1, people still have mistakes. People still have typos. So we should be allowed to make those mistakes and look at it that way.
Yeah, it puts a lot of pressure on us that's unnecessary. And, people still enjoy, we still have an audience who, reads like manga, which are translated from Japanese, and the English translations are not good. People still love them. They flock to them and read them.
Yeah, they're translated by fans.
Yeah, and that's, that excitement, it's really important. There shouldn't be a gatekeeper for comics. And really, it just goes back to ableism and audism, that they're keeping us out, not letting us in, just ignoring our knocks at the door. So there needs to be access for deaf people. They need to learn, through tips. I mean, YouTube and what other things are great ways to spread information, but, there's so much out there, it's hard to find. They're not always going to find it. And if it's someone speaking, the captions are not always accurate. So it's about how to get that information accurately out to people. Going back to the gatekeeping, it really causes us to be stuck. We need to open the gate and allow fresh ideas to mix together. for different cultures and whatnot.
Yep, to impact the culture as a whole.
I feel as a digital artist, you know, the way I draw the world and everything, I typically follow a traditional art style. And when I look at other digital artists, you know, sometimes, you know, it feels like, oh, they're cheating. They're not really drawing. It's not really art. But it's still good. They still had to create. And we still need to give access even to those people. For me, as an indie artist, you know, I'm putting out an inked artist. You know, I do a lot of my drawings.
It's expensive.
Yes. And there's a lot of mistakes. If the ink bleeds, then I have to go and like scan a piece, and there's, you know, Photoshop. I try to scan it and clean it, and I'm just like, ugh, you know, it's not like I can go back and change it so quickly like you can in digital art. So that's a challenging experience. With AI that you mentioned, I do see a lot of possibility. I know there's a lot of people who steal artwork and then, you know, tweak it.
DeviantArt has actually had a database where they actually do that type of theft. Shame on them.
Oh, goodness. So there needs to be like some kind of place where there's regulation of that. And we can, you know, AI, it's easy, you know, you can, if AI is going to do it, you know, you can pay the people for whatever style or whatnot, and that's fine. But I think also that will open up the door for many people to produce comics.
AI cannot replace creators' work. They
No.
can't replace artists.
No.
Yeah. If you want new art, I mean, you have to have artists. If you want art, period, you have to have artists. And yes, you're going back again to remaking a lot of the old art.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have comics produced in ASL using the SI5S writing system. You know, I would love for the characters to be able to sign right there in the comics, you know, have them moving like that. That would be amazing.
An animation.
Yeah, but I mean, the hours it would take.
AI, are you listening? Is AI here? Are they listening?
Yeah. You know, the AI, the virtual reality, you know, what's possible with all this in the future of comics.
Avatar, right?
You know, playing, you know, the characters and the movies and the animation and the comics. It's just so easy to see and amazing to see what's going to happen, you know, 10 to 20 years down the road.
That'll be a treat. Cute dog, Crystal. This is our wet. I really enjoyed your presentations and your discussions. The comic and graphic novel or graphic narrative industries have a lot to contend with. You talked about the limits of ASL literature and how it can be produced through comic strips, and where can we go from now? So I look forward to the conversation between both of our panelists. We have a Q&A portion from our audience members. We have their questions. And so again, let's get to the questions. Caitlin. Has a question about Awa's presentation regarding skepticism and the generations that follow, and how from the older generations we go into revolution. So what happens there? So again, after skepticism, the next generation goes into revolutionaries again, or how does that work? That Muslim scholar, Ibn Halum, he mentions the 4 categories. And one of them, we went revolutionaries, stabilizers, pragmatists, and then skeptics. And you repeat the cycle because you do lose the faith in the current generation. And so the current generation starts to break down. And so when that happens, revolution occurs. Oh, no, the new generation occurs, and then revolution, and then the stability and pragmatist approach. So again, we have to keep an open mind, open heart. And yes, we do have to keep just that approach so that we can flourish. And also learn from our mistakes, learn from history. So if we want histories to be different than past generations, I mean, it might sound cliche, but we do need an open mind, open heart approach.
So yeah, it's really important that we pass this down. We support those who are younger as they're coming up in the field. You know, as we've learned and navigated and figured out this, you know, we've connected to who we are. We figured out our identity. It's really important to be open-minded as we pass this down, because if not, then it's going to be very hurtful. You know, we won't want to continue the generational cycles of trauma. And again, that's true. You know, our lives in the future, we want them to be enriched. We want to bring up the next generation. You know, there's many, many years their beliefs carry on, and we need to go through a shift. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult to change minds, but I love the ability to do that.
Crystal, do you want to present the next question?
Yes. Okay, so the next question is from Shannon, and this is for both panelists. Do you feel like you write for a deaf ASL using audience, or are you trying to reach a hearing audience, or both?
Carla?
Really, I try to reach out to everybody. But at the same time, it's a challenge. What I do, or what I've been doing, is I have a comic and I'll post it and I'll give an explanation about the comic. Sometimes talking about, you know, deaf culture, increasing deaf awareness, like I did with the What QQ. A lot of people may not know about that, so they might not understand the art. So I give a brief explanation about what things mean, so that, you know, people who don't get it can understand. And that's really, I think, beneficial. And I like, it's good experimenting with different ways of doing this, because like, oh, I know this, but not everybody does know that certain things. So they find these things interesting and they learn something new that day by reading the comic.
So the audience I write for, well, my personal belief has to do with never catering to the audience. Specifically, don't pander to the audience because you limit your ability, your artwork. And so, and then it becomes just a trend. And so it takes you away from the universality of your work. I want to have and speak to the universal human experience. And that's what we share in common, as we're socialized in this world. And for those that are finding their identity or struggling with identity issues, everyone experiences that generation across generation. So I want my work to speak to that and have those running threads that people can connect to. Hi, David. And the question is, do you think y'all ever would want to work with a well-known company like Marvel or DC Comics? Would be great for deaf representation in comic books generally. So again, the question is, do you think you would ever want to work for a well-known company, Marvel, DC Comics? I think it'll be good for deaf representation within the comic or graphic narratives industries. So I remember when I first published my first graphic novel, one deaf person came up to me and said, well, are you now making the transition to Marvel? And so that wasn't an expectation of mine after publishing my graphic novel. But I can understand the question. So those companies, I would say, definitely need deaf and disabled creators, and even those that are better than us. They can become guest artists. I will not sell my characters or my books to them, and not in this lifetime.
Oh, yeah.
But I know it's an option.
Yes, Marvel and DC, they have such a sordid history, working with the varied artists who created these characters and then claiming them and using them without giving credit to their creators, and the creators losing out on that. So it would be a challenge to work with a big company like that. What happens to my creative license? Do they then own it? Like, do they take it and they make a movie? I mean, it's one thing, comics may not be a priority more. They might take it and make a movie. And if someone wants to work there, they can't just go and say, hey, I want to work here. You have to have networks and connections and know how to get into those. And those are a challenge, and then for deaf people, finding interpreters to work in that as well.
Definitely.
At the same time, it's a great idea. It would be a great run, the storylines, the things that we can share. So we could, but again, they could be just checking off the boxes. Oh, I've got deaf, I've got diverse, I've got this, I've got that. But what about the actual characters? They're not, it's not 3D, it's not real. It's not like a superpower. It really, if you give them a superpower, it really erases their disability. So does then that show accurate representation?
Jericho from DC, for example, that character signed, but he hears, and that's the superpower. Like, yeah.
Yeah, how he acts, the actors themselves, how they promote it. And they're not explaining, what is really going on. They just see, superficially what's represented. And it's a big company. Will our voice, will our message get across to all the departments? Things would have to improve, definitely.
So I think we have time for one more question from our anonymous attendee. And that is, what is your advice for deaf artists to start the professional artist journey? How, for example, do you hold on to your passion instead of giving up due to few supports, resources in the
Okay, so what is my advice to deaf artists to start their professional artist journey and how to hold on to their passions instead of giving up due to resources? Okay. Get your hands on any type of material you can get your hands on, different sort of art genres as well. You never know what you'll be good at. I mean, you have a good you have what you need. You're starting with what you already have. So experiment. I mean, you have eyes and you have your hands. Whenever you think you or say to yourself, I can't, that's when you should try, do. Life is full of up and downs, and sometimes we lose steam, but that shouldn't affect your motivation. It's really more of a discipline. So you have to stay consistent. Put your butt in the chair and get to work. Get to creating and immerse yourself in a creative environment, right? So then that way you have a slate to work with that can, inspire you and inspire your imagination. So that's what I would say before you, so that you can get there. Self-care, I would say, is critical. So make sure you have some self-care before you get started.
So also in professionalism, really, you have to appreciate what you're doing. There's the professional side. Yes, I love art. Yes, I can do it. But at the end of the day, you have to consider that, sometimes it's a job. Oh gosh, I have to think of this idea, or what am I going to do this day? Or, it's like, oh goodness, I forgot how to draw this. There's that. So, if you're having a bad day, which we all do, that can happen. And, there's work-throughs that you have to figure out. Sometimes you have to work with other people, to work on something and collaborate and keep your identity. There's also concern about income. If you're under financial pressure, that's going to have a big impact. Just start small. Don't, bite off more than you can chew. You don't have to have these huge projects that are going to take up a lifetime. Start small. Draw little fun things, draw, doodle, You know, like they say, go to the library. They have a lot of good comics and resources at the library. There's online resources, and there's so many types of art there that you can play with and just play. Go to workshops, go to events, meet people, you know, attend live streams, you know, see how people do their art on live stream. That's a really cool process. You know, the production of art, you know, those people sometimes interact with you. It's really cool. Just go out there and have a great time.
I agree. Get your hands on all those materials. We had some really good questions from the audience. And if I'm also welcome any questions that haven't been answered. You can submit them via email. This is Awit speaking. And Rez is saying, thank you for attending our Scholarly Intersection Symposium. We made this event, a virtual event, and which made it accessible nationwide. Thank you for joining us today in our event. The Misfits of the Comic and Graphic Narratives Industries. So again, it's really wonderful to have you for you to be here with us and to share your perspectives as creators. Thank you so much for your participation as panelists. Thank you for contributing to our scholarly works. And thank you, Crystal Lee from the Comparative Literature Department. I know everyone's leaving with a lot, Let's
Great
just leave it at that. Okay, we are pulling up the slide here. It doesn't have the link on there, but the link is on the chat. Okay, I got it. The link is on the chat. And this link again is the evaluation link so that you can have your attendance marked with that code. Let's see. Okay, let's see. All right, I think the link is in the chat. This is Carly's. Crystal, your dog is so cute. I think we're done for today. And Awit speaking, Crystal, I think your dog is hungry.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, so we're wrapping up then. This is the code, everyone. X438HM25. So use this code and make sure you fill out your evaluation link. The instructions will be on the link. Thank you so much for attending. And before I forget, is there, okay, nope, I think we got everything covered. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to the interpreters that were with us today.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Bye-bye. Carlise and I are both saying good night.